So this is the fourth tutorial for the Infoz plugin. This is an introduction to the controls display system. This is a bit like, if you ever used CP Wizard, it's a bit like CP Wizard, but it's got kind of extended functionality in terms of you can do controls layouts for all your kind of different systems, emulators, etc. And it's got kind of extended functions kind of beyond what CP Wizard does. So the way to think about this is the kind of demo I'm going to do, which I'm going to kind of set up here, is if you imagine a kind of arcade cabinet, a kind of self-built arcade cabinet, and you've got a control panel on the front of it, and that control panel, as per home-built arcade cabs, any buttons or joysticks are mapped to keyboard keys rather, but you can also plug in a gamepad to a USB port, say a Xbox controller. So you can basically control your emulators either via joysticks and buttons on the control panel on your arcade machine, or you can control it via a gamepad. So that's the kind of setup to imagine. So what we do is, first of all, we add a new layout. We set it to usual kind of drill, really. We set it to the size of the screen that you want to display the controls layout on. What I didn't mention is a prerequisite really for this tutorial is to have gone through maybe not the theme tutorial, but the other two tutorials about getting set up, getting started, and also the other tutorial about info displays and all that kind of thing. So you need to at least have imported kind of system images and got your kind of let's have a think. So you've got some asset paths set up for your emulators. For each emulator, you've got your associated system matched here, so that's crucial. What else? Yeah, and you've also imported your games for each system as well. So age old right click, update games for emulator. So yeah, so it's best to have done the other tutorials really to before you try doing controls layouts. So give this a name. So we're going to name this layout, and we're going to do a different layout for each. We're going to do one for the control panel layout, and we'll do another for the gamepad layout. So we'll call this control panel layout. So we're just going to give it a background. So the usual thing. Now, so you can put in the usual kind of thing. So you can put in dynamic images to show you the system and the game. So we'll do that. And we'll have the game logo over in the right here. And we can have the have some text here, which will tell us the game title. And as per the usual layout stuff, you can have all dynamic text, sorry, what do you call it? Cycling text and cycling images, etc. All the usual stuff will apply. What else should we do with this? Need to outline it. And then we take the prefix off. I'm not quite sure why that's not centering because I want it vertical. So we want that center that. And we'll increase the size. There we go. So that's your normal dynamic stuff. So if you change the game, it will change. Oh yeah, and just in terms of previewing, if you want to preview, because the this is just it's a rough system, which I won't go into. Yeah, if you want to preview the text outline, just click on this symbol here. So yeah, so there you go. That just gives you an overview of how it'll look, basically. So controls. So because this is going to preview the control panel, I'm going to add an image of the actual, well, representation of the control panel on the machine, as it were. So I'm going to add an image which I've got pre-prepared. So there we go. So this is just an image of representation of the control panel on my machine. That's the wrong one, in fact. Let me change it. Or is it? Maybe if I stretch it. That's better. Right, so now the terminology wise, controls. Now controls can refer to one of two things. They can refer to actual physical buttons on actual things you're going to be using in reality. So that will be things like buttons on your arcade machines or button on the physical controllers you're going to be holding in your hand. And in Infoz, they're referred to as rig controls. That's RIG, rig controls. The rig being the machine that you're using to play games on. And that's technically the machine that you're emulating games on. Now, controls can also be abstracted controls. So through your rig, you're going to be emulating systems such as a PlayStation. So you're going to be using an Xbox 360 controller in your hand, say in this example, but you're going to be emulating a PlayStation. So then you're going to be using virtual PlayStation controls in games. So that's a concept to get your head around with Infoz. Controls are both actual controls, rig controls, but also virtual controls as well. But hopefully it'll become clear. So the first thing you need to do is add your rig controls. So these are actual physical controls that you have. Now this button here is add rig control, or you can add rig control this way. Now when you add a rig control, you get both an image and also this is a text label. So you can move your image and move your text label. Now, if you want to find out where your text label is, you can hold down the Alt and click your image, and it will also highlight your text label. So the best way to do this is to just size. So let's say I'm going to do a joystick first. Actually, let's do that. So you want to size it to the rough size of a joystick. Let's do that. And then I'm going to just roughly do a text label below it. So then I'm going to select that. So you select your rig control. I'm going to call this joystick 1 or joy 1. Now for rig control, what I want to select is arcade joystick. So these are all the controls that are available to me at the moment in the controls database. So I'm going to select arcade joystick. Whoops, what happened there? And you'll see that it's populated the arcade joystick. Don't worry about the color of it and all that at the moment. That'll get sorted out in a bit. Now, in terms of input codes, now I'll come back to this in a bit. A joystick itself hasn't got an input code because that is what's called a group control. So if you think about an arcade joystick, it actually has 4 different inputs. So it's up, down, left, right. It's a bit like a D-pad, so that has 4 controls. So it's a group of controls. So technically, you put that as a group control. So as an input control, you select group control. I'll come back to that in a little bit. So for the time being, we'll just leave that like that. Now buttons are slightly easier. So we're going to add another rig control. That's gone up there. Move that there. I'm just going to highlight the joystick so it comes back. Don't know what's going on with that at the moment, but never mind. So let's make the button a bit bigger. That's a bit better. Oh, I know what's going on. I need to prevent click select on this. And hopefully that should stop things messing about. And also, I need to be thinking about my Z indexes. Yeah, so I need to move that back a bit. Give it a name. Right. Okay, so I'm just, for the sake of this example, I'm just going to put 4 buttons on. And again, if you want to highlight where the text is, just press Alt when you left click and it will show you the text. So we're just going to put 4 buttons on. So now we need to change this to your actual rig control. So on a control panel, it's actually an arcade button. So on mine, I've got green buttons. So I choose arcade button green. Now once you're okay with the size of it, just copy it. Oh, one thing I would do is give it. Now this is the other thing. So each rig control is going to be mapped to an input code. Now, an input code is how your computer sees the input. So if I show you, so an input code can either be a joy code, so that will be things like a button code. And if you go here into Tools, on Windows Tools, you can open Controllers Configuration. I haven't got a controller plugged in at the moment, but you can open one if it is, and it will show you the button codes basically. When you press a button on your controller, it will show you it will show you which button number is being pressed, or it will be a key code, so that's a keyboard code. So for things like control panels, you use things like IPAC and things like that. It will show you which key code is pressed, or it can be mouse codes and things like that. So yeah, you basically need to map each of your buttons to whatever the key code is. Now, they're normally pretty standard. So for MAME, lots of IPACs and things like that have a standard mapping. So we'll just go with that for this example. If I can remember them, I can never remember them. Yeah, so left control, left alt. So go this one, it's left control. And we'll call this button 1 or B1. Now you can show the codes via this thing here. There you go. If we just pull this down a bit and out a bit, there, you can see that. Now it might be worth setting up how your text looks at this point. Okay. So just let me check that. Oh yeah, so these are present in black and white, so it should pop a bit more once it's in full color. So once you've got this, copy it and then do paste. Then you can just reposition your next button. And same again. Obviously you do this a bit differently when you're doing this properly. And then you need to change all your key codes to the whatever your buttons are mapped to. I'm just going to put this off screen. So this will map to left alt. This one will map to space. And this one will map to left shift. Okay. So now you have your buttons mapped to your key codes, basically your input codes. So another thing to set up is the kind of group controls. So what we need to do here is to add directional rig controls as well. So if we think about, let's think about a D-pad for PlayStation games. So we're going to have left, right, up and down. So we're going to keep these a bit smaller, and we're, instead of having them that size, we'll just have them this size. And the symbol for this we're going to have as just a generic arrow. So general down, general left. And this so we're going to map this to up, down, left, right on the keyboard. So we'll just expand this a bit as well. We'll make it match this Arial narrow 14.25. The same with this. We'll just move this up a bit. Now we'll copy this one and do the paste. As I say, you'd probably do this a bit more neatly if you're doing this properly, but we'll just do it approximately for now. You probably align these differently. This will be key code right. And you probably use a lot of these functions, kind of align tops, etc., to get this done. Let's do another paste. We'll do this for up. This will be general up. Of course, key code up. And finally, of course, key code down. So it looks very messy at the moment. Once it's all up and running, um, it looks a lot better. So now we've told Infoz the mapping of the rig controls to the inputs. So what we need to do now is let Infoz know how controls are mapped within each emulator. So if we think about the Sony PlayStation emulator, so let's say we've got EPSXE. What we need to know now, what we need to let Infoz know now, is what the settings are, basically. And this is set in the game control input codes. So this is this has actually been set from a previous run. So I did a dry run through this, and it's already been set up. So let me think how I can. I know I can do this. Let's start again. So if you're doing this from scratch, what you're going to be faced with is this. So now what you need to do is let Infoz know you would, first of all, you'd be faced with, if it's fresh out of the box, Infoz comes with a PS1 DualShock already pre-installed as a controller. I'll go on to kind of talk about how you set up your own controllers for systems in due course. But this just gives you an introduction into it. So in this instance, we've got 4 buttons mapped that we're going to map to the 4 main buttons, and also we've got a D-pad map essentially with this joystick. So we're going to map all these and include the PS D-pad as well, because in Infoz you also talk about group controls, which aren't a control in themselves, but are a kind of the group of certain controls, if you like. So what we do here is we select, now if you imagine in the emulator EPSXE, you will have to map a control, so a kind of a virtual controller control against a physical input on your computer, whether it be a keyboard input or whether it be an actual, you could have an Xbox controller connected to your computer. And this is where you assign what that input is. So for cross, we are going to have left control. And then for circle, we're going to have left alt. And then for square, we're going to have spacebar. And then for triangle, we're going to have left shift. Now, of course, you might know or have noticed, hang on, that these correspond to these, which of course they would, because you would set up emulators to correspond to the controls on your control panel. And again, this is actually guess, so this is down, so key code down, keypad left, keypad right, keypad up. And you don't do anything for this. In fact, you can actually delete that if I remember. So you're done. So now you've told Infoz how your emulator is mapped. The other thing you need to do, so this is the group control. Now, you're going to have lots of emulators mapped against this. So what you need to tell it, this is this bit here, group controls. So you do need to tell it for each emulator what the group control is, basically. So now with the PlayStation controller, and it figures this out automatically because it knows the PlayStation controller has 3 group controls. If you think about it, it has the D-pad, it has the left stick and the right stick. You could technically argue it has shoulder buttons groups and yeah, other kind of groups, but that's what I've broken it down to anyway. So you want to tell it that this is basically classified as the D-pad group. So you add a controller for emulator, and now that is going to be classified as the D-pad. So this is the group, and it's the D-pad group. We'll come on to doing other groups. Because you've got no controllers for the other emulators at the moment, you'll see that all controls use no default controller, so you can choose any control as the group, but we'll come back to that later on. But when you have a controller set up for an emulator, then it only shows the groups available for that controller for the emulator. And we've got it set to D-pad. So because we've done that, it now recognizes that it's a recognized group, and it kind of brings it to the fore. It's no longer grayed out. So what's next? Just to make sure we've set up the PlayStation default controller. Which we have, PS1 DualShock. And just to show you the controller, as I say, it's Infoz comes set up with a with the PS1 Dual. So these are all the controls available to Infoz, and these are the controls that make up the PS1 DualShock controller. Control groups, that's basically, this is where you define what constitutes each group. So the D-pad has these in it, D-pad group has those in it, the PS1 left stick has these in it. Obviously there's 5 because that's a click, that's a click. So that's how you define controllers in Infoz. What's next? Okay, so I think possibly, now once we've done that, I've done things in the right order. I just need to show you, let's do it on Tekken 2. Yes, let's do it on Tekken 2. So we've got the mappings. Now what we need to tell, next thing we need to do is map some buttons against moves, basically. So now the other thing that Infoz does in terms of controls is you're going to have different sets of controls for different modes in the game. So for example, you might have, well in Tekken for example, you're going to have the moves whilst you're fighting, and then you're going to be in menu systems, so you're going to be navigating menu systems. So if we do general, for example, we'll put 4 buttons in. And the usual thing with menus, you just control click to do numerous. We've selected general, so if you do add mode and control, you'll see this is the game mode and this is the, so we'll do high punch. There we go. And then we'll do the D-pad and also the D-pad as well. So we'll fill these in. And this is where you choose a general term for the group. And also you can put in controls for another mode. So this is for the main menu mode. So we can do things like such as that. Okay, so now what you're seeing, it's populating now with the default controls. So there we go. It's done it. So you'll see now with Tekken 2, it's populated it with the correct labels, basically with the correct moves, with the correct functions, the game functions for each move, basically. So now the other thing I just want to check. Now, controls viewer settings. This is how you control how the layout looks. And I'll just have a quick look over this. So now show default label. So this is where if you choose a game that hasn't got any game functions programmed, these are game functions essentially. Such as Tekken, we haven't put anything in there. So these are the default labels. Now so for this layout, show default label is set to true. If we do false, so if we do false, then it doesn't show the default labels. Now the default labels are setting controls here. So you can select what the default label is. So back to here, and if we set that back to true, we select the there we go. Yeah, so the game again. Now you can also choose how these are displayed. So if we go through each mode, hide image. Don't know why I chose that one. Don't know how much good that does. Rig is the rig image, the thing that you chose originally. Alternate is an animated mode, and you can check that out by doing this, the clapperboard. So this shows you the animated version. So all alternate does is it alternates between that's the rig image, and that's the basically the controller image of the system that you're using. So say you're emulating a PlayStation, it shows the emulated control image, if you like. That's alternate. You also have the option to superimpose. So it superimposes the controls. And I think I'll leave it on that for this demo because you can see it actually in the editor. You can change things like the superimpose offset, show all game controls. I can't remember what that does now. Oh, that's right. So if you have a missing control, it doesn't actually. Right. Let's experiment with that. So if we take out one of the default game controls, let's take out high kick, and we change show all game controls. If I take this to false, that's right. Yeah. Now if I change it to true, what happens? Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that just basically determines what happens where there's no mapped function, basically. Oops. Anyway, let's put that back. Well, we'll leave it there. Superimpose size, usual stuff. Alternate interval, that's just how quickly they change. Right, so the other thing is game modes. So I'll also, let's just copy this and paste. And this is just, let's shrink it a bit. Now this is going to be game mode. So what this does, we're going to prefix text with this. So what you can get it to do, where there's different game modes, you can also get it to cycle through the game modes. So if we get this cycling, there you go. So it's showing you both the main menu and the general. So that's that. Right, default controls action, cycle default labels. So group controls rendering, this all kind of changes how all this is rendered. So you can choose just to show group only, which just shows the kind of just purely the kind of the summary of all the group controls. Or you can show members only. Or as we had it set, group members. So you really have to get a feel for that by playing around with it. I mean, you can change what you see in terms of what graphics. And again, sometimes you won't see it until you animate it. I'm not sure why that isn't alternating, but again, you have to play around with it really to see what's going on with it. Anyway, so that's about that. What else? So if we do the same kind of thing, let's copy this layout now. And we're going to call this Xbox controller layout. And we're going to get rid of we need to actually no. Let's look smart. We want that normal. Oop. Zoom. So we want that to be, no, we want these all to be rig images. And what we want these to be, yeah, we want to change these. And we want this to be we're going to construct an Xbox controller via the same kind of logic. I'm not going to mess about too much with this. It's just to give us an idea. Now the other thing is group control. So now we want this to be a bit different. And I'm not going to change all these just because of time, really. We'll just do it like that. And again, you align all these a lot better than I'm doing here. So yeah, I guess this just shows, hopefully, that it works across whichever type of controller you have set up. So the last thing to do, I guess, is show it in action. So what we need to do, as usual, is set it up on. So we need to select which display we want to show it on. It only works in games layout. So from the last tutorials, we've got the game info 1 and 2 set up. So we need to add. We need to add control panel layout. Then we add Xbox layout. We do OK. And all being well, it should work. I just need to change OBS settings, and hopefully this should. Okay. Fingers crossed. So as ever, don't worry about how GameX looks. It's just, remember, this is really just practice scratch pad really for showing how the theme editor works. This isn't showing off GameX to its full potential. Anyway, so let's go into Tekken 3. Now, should be able to cycle through the screens. Hopefully, there we go. So we've hit the controls layout screen. And we cycle again. We hit the Xbox controller screen. And then back to the first screen. The other thing is, the menus should automatically, there we go. It should automatically pick up the control screens, and you should be able to choose between which one you see. And then you can automatically also choose which mode you want to see. So do you want to see the general? So it shows you the general, or you can choose main menu mode, and then it shows you the main menu controls. Oops. So yeah, the menu system's quite handy in this as well. So you can choose, let's go to the control menu, let's go to general, or you can choose the main menu. General, main menu. So yeah, that's that. And that's how it shows in GameX. So the next thing to cover is a thing called emulator functions. Now your cab, or you may have hotkeys on your controller, will have things like pause or rewind or snapshot, screenshot, things like that. On my cab, I have kind of buttons up here where I can save games or snapshots, all that kind of thing. So there's a function in Infoz where, yeah, buttons on your cab can do those functions. So basically, you can access those features via emulator functions. If I remember where they are, where did I put them? So you go into emulators. Oh no, let's start again. Same drill really. You add a rig control. Before I do that, this is a good point to introduce, let's delete that. Add in your own controls. So if you go into controls, What I'm going to do here is add my own controls. So a good place to start is adding your own control images. So what you want to do here is, say you've got some custom buttons, which I have. So these are my these are representative of the buttons on my cab. So you can add these buttons. And as you see, they've been added to the list of available images to controls. And now I'm going to add these as new controls. I'll just add 3, and I'm going to give them a title: home, pause, and I can't remember what the other one was now. Controls. Okay, and then you can set the default image and also give them a default label. So you've just added your custom controls. Now you can add a rig control, add it to, actually, whilst we're sizing, when you're adding rig controls, it's always a good idea to just put it to rig on your layout. That just helps with sizing. If you've got it to superimpose, it's always a bit smaller because it's resized due to obviously being resized due to the superimpose, basically. Yeah, so that'll do. Let's again, just a tip, do that, and then you'll be able to see your text and how it looks. And we're going to have this as home. And then again, as you've done with the other ones, you just map this to whatever the input code is. So I'm going to have this as escape. I'm going to copy that. There we go. Right. So I don't know, make this one F1 or something. Okay. So the next thing to do is to map your emulator. So again, as per the kind of controller controls in your emulator, you're also going to be able to map functions of your emulator to keys, and that's where this emulator function input code comes. So again, I've already done that here. So on a previous kind of run through, so I'll just delete these. So home is mapped to escape, show controls. I'm going to map to F1. And pause. I'm going to map to F2. Of course, what I did forget to do was to change these. I've got these the right way around. I think I have. Right, okay. So now, hopefully, if I choose PlayStation and game, and if I take off, so this one overwrites the labels with the key codes, and if I take that off, it doesn't do pause for some reason. Why is that? F2. Let me double check the emulator setting. That's why. I was selected it and not added it. So if I set that to F2. There. So, there you go. Now, if I were to, let's have a think, set up the Atari 2600. And I would set up the emulator as something different. And so home, again, escape. And this is F1. And this is F2. Let's double check they're assigned. They are. Okay. If I select a game now, there you go. So you see it assigns different keys. Yeah, so that's emulator functions basically. Another thing I can show you is in-game remaps. So let's say you in Tekken 3 you remap in-game your low and high kick. So in your Tekken 3 settings, you swap over the buttons for low and high kick. Let's swap them over again. So superimpose. So X is low kick, circle is high kick. Go to your game. You've got a facility called in-game control remaps. Let's make this a bit bigger. So you'll see that that shouldn't be there. Okay, I'm still getting things coming through from the dry run. Let's start again. So let's say you got low kick and high kick, which is X and circle, and that's your standard default mapping. But you go into the in-game settings and you want to remap them. So what you would do is you want to remap low kick to X. So you select X and you go remap to this, and you want to remap high kick to circle and you go remap to this. Now if you watch, they should swap over. Sometimes you have to click the game. And there you go, they've swapped. So simple as that, really. And that will just remember your settings for that. The other thing is sometimes you might remap controls on a per game basis in your emulator. So you might remap, and I can't remember what's what. So that's left control and that's left alt. So you might remap left control to left alt and vice versa. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Let's try it. Left alt, left control. Left control, left alt. Hang on a sec. Left control, left alt. So X is presently left control. I want it to go to left alt. X, left alt. Yeah, anyway, can't get my head around that at the moment, but yeah, I'm not sure if it works or not. I think it does. But anyway, if anyone can figure it out, let me know. Yeah, so that's that. What else can I show you? Done emulator functions. Adding a new controller. So just let me undo what I just did there. So yeah, I think that did work because I think that replaced that then. So, yeah. Anyway, so adding a new controller. So let's make a controller for the Atari 2600. So at the moment we've only got that as a controller, so we need to add a new controller, and we'll call it Atari 2600 generic. We'll add some controls. So all we need, of course, is R, fire. We need down, left, right, up, and then you need a group control. So we add those. Then we need to add a controls group. So we add all the components and then we add the group member. No, we don't. I tell a lie. We add the group member, so add new group. Then we select the group member and then we select the group components and we do add control. So that becomes, these become the group members of that component, of that group. And then that's the controller. We have our controller. Then we need to map our controller against the system. So Atari 2600. Then we set default controller to Atari 2600 generic. And now we double check that we have got associated system to 2600, which it is. Yeah, and now when we go to Atari 2600 games and we choose Decathlon, maybe, we go to default game controls. There we go. We're given a default system controller Atari 2600 generic. Yeah, so that's basically how default controllers work. Let's add them all. And there we go. So that's that. So on to MAME setups. First of all, make sure you've imported all your MAME ROMs into GameX. Secondly, that you've imported all your MAME games into Infoz via the usual route, right-clicking on the emulator and import games. You should have your full game list as you've got here. Then you need to go into Tools, MAME Tools, Update Game Controls, and Automatically. You see down the bottom left, it gives you an update about where it's at in the process. So you just need to wait for that to complete. So it does give you an update in terms of how the import went, basically. This is very much depends upon your ROM set and how the import goes in terms of, I don't know, I haven't looked into it a great deal in terms of GameX's import process and how it matches against ROM sets, but that's something for the future potentially. But so everything's imported, so hopefully there. So now you have the various button matchings. So you can see all the where there is a known kind of button match, they're shown basically. So if we pick a well-known game A B cop. Acrobat mission, maybe. Yeah. Aero fighters. Afterburner. Air galley. So all these have known button matches. The other thing is, don't forget with your group control. Now, because you're setting up MAME, you need to set up this to known MAME control. So MAME joystick, probably. Let's add that. Excuse me. Now, this is a good point to introduce the idea of overrides. So these controls viewer settings, you can override them. So say the superimpose works really well for, you might want the superimpose to apply to emulators, for example. So they work really well for PlayStation games and for Atari games. So you like the look of that, but they don't work very well for MAME games because there's no real images for the MAME. So what you'd want is all MAME layouts to have different settings for the controls viewers. So what you want to do is override some of these settings. So you can do that because if you look in emulators, MAME, you have controls viewers overrides. And you can override the controls viewer settings in several places. You can do it in emulators, and you can do it, I think, in game, and actually in rig controls as well. So in this one, you want to do true. So we're going to override the control viewer settings there for MAME. So already it's looking a lot better. Now you might want to, so maybe what we want to do with this one is not show buttons where there's no function. So let's have a look. We're using show default label. Let's try turning this off, see if that makes any difference. Yep. We might want them, the buttons not being used, to be grayed out. So how would we do that? Let's try that. There we go. So functionless game controls are grayscale transparent. Be careful with, to make sure you're only working on the right thing at the right time. Now, sometimes it's a little confusing about what overrides are in play when you're looking at a layout. So there is a way to show that somehow, if I can remember how to show it. There. So if you press this, this will show you a little symbol. If you go to help, this here shows you the key for all the different overrides, basically. So yeah, that will give you a kind of, so if you look here, this shows that the emulator override is active on these rig controls. So yeah. So yeah, that's the main controls. So it automatically populates all of those. There is a way to get this group control working better. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Let's mess around with it a bit more. You can also layer overrides. So in this instance, I'm wanting, basically it's getting difficult to make the joystick appear, well, stop it kind of graying out. So what I can do is click on the joystick and enable override and click true, and then functionless control action none, which will make sure it's always visible no matter what, basically. And then if you look at the key, it shows that it's got an emulator override and a control override. So that's basically the layout is the base controls viewer setting. Then you have an emulator override on top of that. Then that's superseded by the controls override, which gives you that effect. Another thing you can do with MAME layouts is it's just a setting here which is use MAME colors. So it imports colors to INI, which means if I go to, just give it a, well, you got one there, 1000 Miglia. Basically imports different button colors for each game. So if we go to some different games, you'll see it imports different button colors for different games. So let's have another look. There's some examples. So we'll find any more. So yeah, that's probably about it. There's probably lots of other things, but that's basically it, really. There's lots of little bits to, yeah, I mean, you can get you can use links for, let's have a look. If we go into viewer settings, I think is in settings. Show connector. I can't remember where it is now, but you can basically set up to have a connector between the labels. Yeah, various other things, but that's an overview basically of of the controls system in Infoz. So have a play with it. You can't break it. Well, you probably will. In terms of it's probably breakable. But yeah. You found it of some use. Let me know how you get on. And yeah, have fun most of all. Cheers.